Alrighty, welcome back everyone, I am Blaze here. This video we're going to be talking about the top 3 melee DPS classes with a few honorable mentions. Let's get into it. So number 1, I'm going to place Monk. They're very consistently near the top, if not the top, melee DPS class in most expansions. They come out of the gate in Classic very strong and continue to get incrementally better and each expansion become better gear, such as their Epic in Kunark, Avatar weapons in Velius, and so on and so forth. And they are indispensable to raids in the first couple expansions for pulling, because they're one of the only classes that has an ability to completely wipe aggro in a very efficient fashion prior to, say, bards getting fading memories in Planes of Power. In group pulling, they're viable, but they don't necessarily stack up to a couple other classes in terms of pulling speed. But they are still a very strong DPS class, and one of the things that I really like about them is that they have a very quick base attack speed. A lot of their weapons are based upon quick attacks and hitting multiple times per round. So if they miss, if they do a whiff on one round, it's not as big of a deal as it is, say, for a ranger with a long delay bow. Misses don't seem to affect them as bad. So number 2, I'm going to place Ranger. This is exclusively just for Shadows of Luklin. I'm not sure how they stack up in Planes of Power, but I think they're still quite strong. In many of the recent parses I've seen in Shadows of Luklin, Rangers are outbeating monks for the first time ever. Rangers are consistently near the top of the parse on the majority of fights for the melee type classes. And what happened is they were rather subpar prior, but come Shadows of Luklin, they get Endless Quiver, which allows them to have infinite arrows essentially. It lets them use the best arrow possible and use it infinitely, as well as Weapon Mastery of the Scout, which was previously called Archery Mastery. And it boosts the damage capabilities. And when you stack critical hits, the chance to have critical hits, and you boost that, I think it's called Burst of Power, or Combat Fury, one of those AAs, their DPS potential is absolutely insane. Usually their strategy is a long delay bow that hits really hard, and then when you stack a couple of their dots on top of it, they can put out some serious heat. They can definitely put out some serious heat, and then True Shot on top of that for the occasional extra burst. And one of the biggest advantages that Rangers have is that because their bows hit from a range, because their bows allow them to fight with some distance, they can often avoid a lot of the nasty area effect spells that many raid targets put out. They can often completely avoid the slows that some raid targets put out. They can avoid the attack debuffs that some raid targets put out. The only issue that I noticed with Rangers is that they can't control the way that raid mobs face. Ideally, Rangers want to be shooting their arrows from a mob's back, not from the front. Mobs have reduced defensive capabilities when they're being hit from the back. And in some raid fights, these mobs are rooted, and they can't really be turned. But otherwise, Rangers are very, very effective. They definitely outplace monks come Shadows of Luklin, if not compete with them. And now let's talk about number 3, the number 3 top DPS class. That would be Rogues. Now, unfortunately, it kind of stinks. They're a class that's explicitly made just to DPS. They really don't have a lot of other utility beyond that, beyond, say, block picking or the disarm traps, their sneak and hide. They don't offer a lot of the other utilities that many of the classes do. So with the class is so heavily DPS focused, it's kind of a shame where in the first couple expansions, they're really lackluster. I mean, they can make it on the parse, but they're nowhere near the top. They're usually around the middle tier. Prior to Shadows of Luklin, I think they're better than Rangers are, but then after it, no. But from what I've heard, I believe there's some alternate advancements that come in Planes of Power that definitely make Rogues much more viable in terms of their DPS capabilities. And they're also very weapon-based. Having an avatar weapon in Velius helps them out tremendously. It's not to say that they can't put in work, but I don't think that they get really in stride until later AAs come into effect. And some honorable mentions. Of all the 3 main knight classes or plate-wearing tank classes, I honestly only see Shadow Knights ever really pop up on the parse. I've actually seen them. They can show up from time to time. And I think they do get better come later expansions, but they do show up. They actually can make the parse in terms of their DPS. And I'm not totally familiar with where Beast Lords wind up on the parse, but they definitely would at least compete with a Shadow Knight in terms of middle to low tier DPS. And unfortunately, I think Warriors are the second to worst, and then Bards are the absolute worst. But hey, Bards can be saved by some extraneous DPS abilities. I play the worst DPS class in the game, but hey, Bards, they make everybody at least 25% better, if not significantly more than that. So lastly, let me talk about how they stack up versus casters. Let's talk about how monks and rangers stack up against casters. Again, it really depends on the raid fight. Most general fights, I mean, they're par for par. I'd say actually the melee DPS based classes would do better on most general fights, grouping fights, than casters, just because mana isn't as much of a concern, isn't as much of a limitation. But on raid fights, it's really Wizards have always consistently been number 1, but then I would put Rangers as number 2 in Shadows of Luklin, but prior to that I'd put Monks as number 2 top DPS from Classic on to Velius. Rogues typically in the middle consistently throughout all those expansions, and the Shadow Knights popping up on the low end. So thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next one.